"I'm sorry, Mother, but we need your bedroom for Thomas's home office now that he's working remotely," my son explained with practiced patience when I told him about my stage 3 cancer diagnosis. What Gregory couldn't have anticipated was that Maria, the housekeeper he barely acknowledged for 15 years, would become the one to drive me to every chemotherapy appointment, hold my hand through nights of sickness, and ultimately become the daughter I never had, and the sole beneficiary of the estate he thought was already his. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Williams, and at 73 years old, I've learned that life's most valuable lessons often come wrapped in its most painful betrayals. I spent 42 years as a high school English teacher in Oakridge, a quiet suburb outside of Boston, where my late husband James built a successful accounting practice while we raised our only son, Gregory. The tree-lined streets of Oakridge were where James and I purchased our colonial home in 1972, stretching our modest dual incomes to afford what seemed like an extravagant purchase at the time. The 3-bedroom house with its small garden became the setting for countless Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and the everyday moments that build a family's history. I can still recall Gregory learning to ride his bicycle on our sloped driveway, James running alongside him with one hand steadying the seat, until that magical moment when our son found his balance and pedaled forward on his own. We lived modestly during those teaching years, saving carefully and investing wisely on James's advice. Our vacations were simple road trips to national parks or visits to James's parents in Vermont, while Gregory's classmates often jetted off to tropical destinations. During school breaks, we explored museums, hiked mountain trails, and taught our son the value of experiences over extravagance. At least, that's what we believed we were teaching him. James was meticulous with our finances, setting aside a percentage of each paycheck into what he called our security portfolio. I trusted his judgment completely, focusing my energy on my students and our home while he managed the practical aspects of our financial future. His careful planning seemed almost excessive at times, declining opportunities for more immediate pleasures in favor of growing our nest egg. "Security first, luxuries second," he would remind me whenever I questioned whether we might splurge on something special. When Gregory left for college, the first in either of our families to attend university, we proudly funded his education. At Northeastern without loans, the result of 18 years of dedicated saving. "This is your inheritance in advance," James told him at his high school graduation. "An education that will set you up for life without the burden of debt." Gregory seemed genuinely appreciative, hugging his father with tears in his eyes, a moment I captured in a photograph that still sits on my bedside table. Or rather, it did until recently. Through Gregory's college years and early career, our relationship remained close, at least by outward appearances. Sunday dinners continued whenever his schedule permitted, and he called regularly to share updates about his progress at the marketing firm where he had quickly advanced to management. When he met Diane during his late 20s, we welcomed her warmly into our family traditions. Their wedding in 2005 was a joyful celebration, with James giving a heartfelt toast about the values of partnership and family loyalty that had sustained our marriage for over 3 decades. Thomas, our only grandchild, arrived 2 years later, bringing that special kind of joy that grandparents often describe, but first-time grandparents can never fully anticipate until they experience it themselves. James transformed into the kind of grandfather who would spend hours building elaborate Lego structures on the living room floor, something I had rarely seen him do with Gregory. Perhaps retirement had softened him, or perhaps grandparenting allows for a different kind of presence than the more demanding role of parent. We settled into what I believed was a pleasant rhythm as an extended family. Gregory and Diane purchased a home about 20 minutes from ours, close enough for regular visits but with sufficient distance to maintain their independence. I cherished my role as grandmother, happily babysitting Thomas when needed and attending His school events with the kind of undivided attention that working parents sometimes struggle to provide. James and I found new depths in our relationship during these retirement years, traveling more extensively than we had during our working lives and developing shared hobbies that brought us closer. When James began experiencing shortness of breath during our morning walks in 2015, I initially attributed it to seasonal allergies, or perhaps the natural slowing that comes with advancing age. His reluctance to see a doctor, a stubborn trait he had displayed throughout our marriage, meant that the heart condition went undiagnosed until his symptoms became impossible to ignore. By then, the damage was extensive. The cardiologist explained treatment options with a gravity that immediately conveyed the seriousness of the situation, though James maintained his stoic demeanor throughout the consultation. "Don't worry about me," he insisted as we drove home from the appointment. "I've prepared for everything." At the time, I thought he was simply being optimistic about his medical prognosis. Only later would I understand he was referring to the financial security he had carefully constructed over our decades together. The 8 months between diagnosis and James's passing were filled with medical appointments, medication adjustments, and the gradual narrowing of his world as his energy diminished. Gregory visited regularly during this period, often bringing Thomas for brief visits that brightened James's increasingly difficult days. Diane sent homemade meals and thoughtful cards, gestures that suggested genuine concern for our well-being during this challenging time. I was grateful for their presence and support, never imagining how dramatically our relationship would transform in the years ahead. James passed peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, his hand resting in mine as I dozed in the chair beside our bed. The finality of that moment, realizing I was now truly alone after 47 years of marriage, created a hollowness I hadn't known was possible. The practical aspects of widowhood occupied the immediate weeks that followed. Funeral arrangements, notification of distant relatives and colleagues, and the overwhelming paperwork that accompanies a death in modern society. Gregory handled many of the logistical details, accompanying me to meetings with the funeral director and helping to select the casket and arrangements. His efficiency during this period was both impressive and comforting. He seemed to have inherited his father's practical approach to difficult situations. "Don't worry about anything, Mom," he assured me repeatedly. "Dad and I discussed what needed to be done, and I'm taking care of it all." It wasn't until about 3 weeks after the funeral, when the casseroles from neighbors had stopped arriving and the phone calls had diminished to occasional check-ins, that Gregory suggested we meet with James's attorney to discuss the estate. Dad was very specific about wanting everything handled promptly, he explained as he scheduled the appointment. He wouldn't want you worrying about financial matters while you're grieving. The meeting with Harrison Palmer, James's longtime attorney and occasional golf partner, revealed the extent of my husband's financial acumen. The investment portfolio he had carefully built over our decades together had grown substantially, bolstered by property investments and some surprisingly successful stock selections. The life insurance policy, our mortgage-free home, and various retirement accounts created a financial picture that far exceeded my understanding of our circumstances. "James was quite talented with investments," Harrison explained gently, perhaps noticing my stunned expression as he outlined the extent of the estate. "He was also adamant about ensuring your complete financial security for the remainder of your life." The will was straightforward. Everything transferred directly to me, with Gregory named as the eventual beneficiary, upon Eleanor's passing or at her discretion. A separate letter from James, which Harrison handed to me in a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's distinctive handwriting, contained his more personal guidance. I waited until I returned home to read it, sitting in James's study, surrounded by his books and the subtle scent of the sandalwood aftershave he had used throughout our marriage. His words were characteristically practical, yet unexpectedly tender. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to whatever comes next, and you're facing the challenges of continuing without me. I'm deeply sorry to leave you. with this burden, but I find comfort in knowing that you've always been stronger than you realize. I've done my best to ensure you'll never face financial insecurity. The details can seem overwhelming, but Harrison will help simplify everything. The accounts are structured to provide regular monthly income without requiring any financial expertise on your part. The house is yours free and clear, as is everything else we've built together. While Gregory is listed as the eventual beneficiary, I want to be absolutely clear. These resources exist first and foremost for your comfort, security, and happiness. Do not feel obligated to preserve the estate for Gregory's future benefit at the expense of your own well-being. Our son has received an excellent education and has the skills to build his own security, just as we did. Use these resources to live fully, pursue interests we may have delayed, and secure whatever assistance you need as you age. Your comfort is my primary concern. All my love. For all our years, James. This letter became my touchstone in the months that followed, a tangible connection to James and a reminder of his care for me even beyond his lifetime. I kept it in my bedside drawer, often rereading it during those first difficult nights alone in our bed, finding both comfort and guidance in his words. Gregory initially seemed supportive of my independent living, calling regularly and visiting most Sundays with Diane and Thomas. We maintained the tradition of family dinners, though now I prepared them alone, or sometimes with Diane's help when she arrived early enough to assist. These gatherings provided structure during those first bewildering months of widowhood, anchoring my weeks with family connection that helped mitigate the loneliness of my daily routine. It was during this period that Maria entered my life more significantly. She had cleaned our home on a bi-weekly basis for nearly 15 years, a reliable presence who had always been pleasant but somewhat peripheral to our family life. James had initially arranged for her services when my teaching schedule became particularly demanding, insisting that there's no virtue in exhaustion when we can afford help. Maria was in her early 50s, an Ecuadorian immigrant whose children were now grown and pursuing their own education and careers. Her English had improved dramatically over the years we had known her, moving from the basic functional phrases of our early interactions to increasingly fluid conversation as time passed. After James's death, she occasionally stayed longer after, finishing her cleaning tasks, joining me for tea, and gradually sharing more about her own life story. I learned about her journey to America at 32, leaving 2 young children with her mother temporarily while she established herself in a country where she knew no one and spoke minimal English. She had worked multiple jobs simultaneously during those early years, cleaning houses during the day and office buildings at night, sending most of her earnings back to Ecuador while living in a shared apartment with 4 other immigrant women. The hardest thing wasn't the work, she told me during one of our afternoon conversations. It was missing birthdays, first days of school, the everyday moments of watching my children grow. But I kept telling myself it was temporary, that the sacrifice would create opportunities they could never have if we stayed. Her determination had paid off. After 3 years, she had saved enough to bring her children to join her, settling them into a small apartment and navigating the complexities of enrolling them in American schools while continuing her demanding work schedule. Her daughter was now a registered nurse, and her son was completing a degree in computer science. Achievements she spoke of with quiet pride that reminded me of James's satisfaction when discussing a particularly successful investment. These conversations with Maria gradually shifted our relationship from employer-employee to something approaching friendship. I began looking forward to her visits not just for the immaculate home she left behind, but for the companionship and perspective she provided. Our age difference and vastly different life experiences might have seemed barriers to connection, but instead, they provided rich ground for exchange and mutual appreciation. It was Maria who first noticed the subtle changes in my health that I had been dismissing as normal aging or lingering grief. "You're tired in a different way," she observed one afternoon as I rested in the sunroom while she finished her cleaning. "And you're losing weight without trying. My cousin had the same signs before her diagnosis. Please see a doctor, Mrs. Williams. Her concern prompted me to schedule the checkup I had been postponing, beginning the sequence of appointments, tests, and increasingly serious consultations that culminated in the diagnosis. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. The oncologist, Dr. Patel, outlined treatment options with compassionate directness, emphasizing that while the diagnosis was serious, there were good reasons for optimism given my otherwise good health and the advances in treatment protocols. Gregory accompanied me to this crucial appointment, taking detailed notes on his tablet and asking pertinent questions about survival rates and treatment side effects. His presence was reassuring, the kind of practical support that echoed his father's approach to difficult situations. When Dr. Patel stepped out briefly to retrieve some additional information materials, Gregory squeezed my hand and said firmly, "We'll get through this together, Mom. We're family." Those words, "we're family," would echo ironically through the months that followed, as the true meaning of family was tested and ultimately redefined in ways I never could have anticipated when I first heard those terrifying words. Stage 3. Cancer. The drive home from Dr. Patel's office was quiet, with Gregory focused on navigating the afternoon traffic while I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar neighborhoods pass by in a blur. The weight of the diagnosis pressed against my chest, making each breath feel deliberate and insufficient. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. Words that transformed my future in an instant, turning retirement plans into treatment schedules and everyday concerns into existential questions. "I think you should move in with us," Gregory said as we turned onto Maple Street, breaking the lengthy silence. "The treatment is going to be rough, Mom. You shouldn't be alone in this house during chemo." His offer caught me by surprise. While Gregory had always been conscientious, he was also fiercely protective of his private space and professional boundaries. The prospect of him opening his home during what would undoubtedly be a disruptive and difficult time seemed uncharacteristically selfless. "That's very kind, but I'm not sure," I began, thinking of my comfortable routines, my garden, and the comfort of being surrounded by James's books and the memories embedded in every corner of our home. "I've already discussed it with Diane," he interrupted, his tone suggesting the matter was settled. "She agrees completely. The guest room is small, but it's on the first floor, which means no stairs to manage when you're feeling weak from treatments." As he pulled into my driveway, I noticed he had already shifted from offering assistance to planning implementation, a trait he had inherited from James, who similarly tended to move directly from identification of a problem to execution of a solution without lingering in the consultation phase. While sometimes frustrating, this approach had served James well in business matters. Perhaps Gregory's decisiveness would be a blessing during the uncertainty of cancer treatment. "Let me think about it," I said as we entered the house. "It's a lot to process all at once." Gregory nodded, though his expression suggested he considered the decision inevitable rather than optional. He stayed long enough to make a pot of tea and call Diane with an update before checking his watch and explaining that he needed to attend Thomas's soccer practice. As he gathered his things to leave, he paused in the doorway. "You raised me to believe family takes care of family," he said, his voice carrying a hint of finality. "Let us take care of you now, Mom." Those words, "family takes care of family," resonated deeply as I sat alone in the quiet kitchen after his departure. They reflected the values that had guided James and me throughout our marriage and parenting journey, principles we had tried to instill in Gregory through both instruction and example. My thoughts drifted to my own childhood in Western Massachusetts, where my parents had demonstrated the meaning of family commitment through consistent action rather than mere declaration. My father, William Bennett, worked for 43 years at the same paper mill, rising from floor worker to shift supervisor through reliability and quiet competence rather than ambitious networking. My mother, Ruth, managed our modest household with remarkable efficiency, stretching my father's income to cover necessities while still finding resources for occasional small luxuries that made our simple life feel abundant. When my uncle, Robert, suffered a debilitating stroke in 1962, my parents rearranged our home to accommodate his wheelchair, converting our small dining room into a bedroom so he could avoid the indignity of institutional care. I was 16 at the time and remember clearly my mother's response when I complained about the disruption to our family dinners, now relocated to the kitchen with its cramped quarters. "Family shows up when it matters," she said firmly, her hands continuing to knead bread dough while her eyes held mine with unusual intensity. "Not when it's convenient, not when there's something to gain, but when the need is greatest. That's the test of what we truly value." For the 3 years Uncle Robert lived with us until his passing, my parents demonstrated daily what it meant to prioritize care over convenience, adjusting their routines and sacrificing personal space to provide dignity and connection to a man who had lost much of his independence. My father bathed his brother without complaint after long shifts at the mill, and my mother included him in family activities with thoughtful adaptations that preserved his sense of participation despite his limitations. James and I had consciously continued this tradition of practical care in our own family life. When his mother developed early-onset dementia in her 60s, we incorporated her into our household for the final 4 years of her life, rather than placing her in a nursing facility. Those years were challenging. Balancing her increasing needs with Gregory's adolescent activities and our full-time careers required constant adjustment and occasional sacrifice of personal plans or preferences. I remember Gregory's initial resistance to his grandmother's presence, the teenage frustration at having to moderate music volume and explain household routines repeatedly to someone whose memory was rapidly failing. James addressed this resistance not with punishment, but with context, taking 16-year-old Gregory for a drive one evening after a particularly difficult interaction. When they returned several hours later, Gregory's attitude had noticeably shifted. He never shared the specific content of their conversation, but in the months that followed, he demonstrated increasing patience with his grandmother, occasionally sitting beside her with old photo albums, gently reminding her of names and events when confusion clouded her eyes. After her passing, James explained that he had shown Gregory the nursing home where his father's sister had spent her final years, a well-regarded but ultimately institutional setting where residents received professional care but limited personal connection. "I wanted him to understand the difference between being cared for and being cared about," James explained. "Between meeting physical needs and preserving human dignity. These aren't abstract concepts. They're choices we make that define who we are as a family." These memories surfaced as I considered Gregory's offer to move into his home during my cancer treatment. The values seemed aligned with our family history, showing up when it matters, prioritizing care during illness, maintaining dignity through family support rather than institutional assistance. Perhaps his decisive approach simply reflected the urgency he felt about implementing these principles in the face of my diagnosis. The following morning, Maria arrived for her regular Thursday cleaning session. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my barely touched breakfast when she entered, using the key we had provided years ago to allow her access if we weren't home. "Mrs. Williams," she called, then appeared in the doorway, concern immediately visible in her expression when she saw me. "Are you okay? You look very pale." The simple question somehow breached the composure I had maintained through the doctor's appointment, the drive home, and the evening alone with my thoughts. Tears welled unexpectedly, and Maria set down her cleaning supplies and moved swiftly to the chair beside me, her hand covering mine with gentle pressure. "I received a diagnosis yesterday," I managed to explain between uneven breaths. "Ovarian cancer, stage 3. Maria's grip on my hand tightened, her eyes holding mine with an intensity that conveyed understanding beyond words. Unlike the clinical compassion of Dr. Patel or Gregory's problem-solving response, Maria's reaction carried the weight of personal recognition. My sister had breast cancer 5 years ago, she said quietly. I understand a little of what you're facing. The treatments are difficult, but she is still here, still strong. You will fight this. The simple assertion, you will fight this, somehow crystallized the path forward more clearly than all the medical explanations and statistical probabilities Dr. Patel had provided. Maria didn't question whether I would pursue treatment or how I would manage the challenges ahead. She simply stated with certainty that I would engage in the battle, regardless of its difficulty. Gregory wants me to move in with them during treatment, I explained, finding unexpected relief in sharing the decision with someone who had no stake in the outcome. Maria nodded thoughtfully. That could be good support. Their house is closer. To the hospital, yes. About 15 minutes closer, I acknowledged. And having help available during the worst days of chemo would be practical. When will you go? She asked, already thinking through the implications with the pragmatism that characterized her approach to challenges. We haven't decided yet. I need to meet with Dr. Patel once more to confirm the treatment schedule before making arrangements. Maria nodded, then squeezed my hand once more before standing. I will clean extra thoroughly today, so everything is perfect while you decide. She paused, then added with gentle firmness. Whatever you choose, I am here to help. Not just for cleaning. The sincerity in her offer brought fresh tears to my eyes. Maria had her own family, her own challenges, yet was extending support, without hesitation or calculation. The contrast with Gregory's more measured approach, practical yet somehow distant, was not something I wanted to examine too closely in that moment. The days that followed brought increasing clarity to my medical situation while creating unexpected complexity in my living arrangements. The treatment plan Dr. Patel outlined was aggressive. Surgery within 2 weeks to remove as much of the cancer as possible, followed by 6 rounds of chemotherapy at 3-week intervals. The surgery would require a hospital stay of approximately 5 days, with limited mobility recommended during the initial recovery period. You'll need consistent support during this time, Dr. Patel emphasized during our follow-up consultation, which Gregory again attended. The post-surgical period and early chemotherapy cycles can be particularly challenging. Having family assistance will be invaluable. Gregory nodded decisively. She'll be staying with us, doctor. We're making arrangements already. His confidence might have been reassuring had it not preceded any actual discussion between us about the specific timing or details of such a move. On the drive to his home after the appointment, a direction he had taken without consultation, Gregory outlined his plan with the efficiency that characterized his professional approach to project management. We'll move you in this weekend, he explained as we navigated the suburban streets leading to his neighborhood of newer, substantially larger homes than my modest colonial. That gives us a week before surgery to get you settled. The guest room is small but functional, and it's right across from the downstairs bathroom, which should be convenient during recovery. As we pulled into his driveway, I noted the meticulously maintained landscaping and imposing facade that reflected Gregory and Diane's substantial dual incomes. Their home was beautiful but had always felt somewhat impersonal to me, more showcase than sanctuary, with its pristine white furniture and carefully curated decorative objects that seemed positioned for visual impact rather than comfort or meaning. Diane greeted us at the door, her expression conveying appropriate concern, though her body language suggested the slight tension that often characterized our interactions. Our relationship had always been cordial, but never quite warm, maintaining the polite distance of in-laws who respect boundaries rather than seeking deeper connection. We're so glad you'll be staying with us, Eleanor, she said, leading us through the formal living room toward the back of the house. Gregory's been getting everything ready since your diagnosis. The guest room was indeed small, particularly in comparison to the spacious master bedroom I glimpsed through a partially open door upstairs. A twin bed with a simple white comforter occupied most of the available floor space, with a small nightstand and narrow dresser completing the furnishings. The window overlooked the side yard, where the air conditioning unit hummed steadily, its mechanical drone creating a constant background noise. "It's not very big," Diane acknowledged as we stood in the doorway. "But we thought being on the first floor would be most practical during your recovery." "Of course," I agreed, trying to envision myself occupying this space for the months of treatment ahead. "It's very thoughtful of you both." "We'll need to move some of your things this weekend," Gregory added, checking something on his phone as he spoke. "Just the essentials for now: clothes, medications, whatever personal items you need immediately. We can get more later if necessary." The efficiency of their planning was both impressive and somewhat disorienting. Within 48 hours of my diagnosis, my son and daughter-in-law had restructured their home and schedules to accommodate my presence during treatment, a demonstration of family values that should have been reassuring, yet somehow left me feeling strangely disconnected from the process. "Let me show you the rest of the setup," Gregory continued, leading me across the hallway to a small bathroom with recently installed grab bars beside the toilet and in the shower stall. "I had these put in yesterday to make things safer during recovery." The practical modifications touched me deeply, evidence of genuine concern for my well-being and safety that transcended the somewhat clinical approach to the arrangements. Whatever emotional distance I sensed in Gregory's planning, the tangible adaptations to accommodate my needs demonstrated care in a language he had perhaps inherited from James, actions rather than expressions of feeling. As we completed the tour and settled in the kitchen for tea, Thomas arrived home from school, his 13-year-old energy filling the space as he dropped his backpack and headed straight for the refrigerator. He paused when he noticed me, his expression shifting from teenage indifference to awkward concern. "Hi, Grandma," he said, lingering by the refrigerator rather than approaching for his usual casual hug. "Dad said you're sick." "I have cancer," I confirmed gently, seeing no reason to shield him from the reality he would witness in the months ahead. "The doctors are going to perform surgery and then chemotherapy to treat it. I'll be staying here during my treatment, so your parents can help me." Thomas nodded, his eyes darting toward his father as if seeking guidance on the appropriate response. "That sucks," he offered finally, the teenage vernacular somehow perfectly capturing the situation's essence. "Are you going to lose your hair and stuff?" "Most likely," I acknowledged with a small smile at his directness. "But it grows back after treatment ends." "Cool. I mean, not cool that you'll lose it, but cool that it comes back." He shifted uncomfortably, then gestured toward the stairs. "I have a ton of homework, so—" "Go ahead," Gregory told him, and Thomas disappeared upstairs with evident relief, the encounter highlighting the awkwardness that often characterizes adolescent responses to illness and mortality. Later that evening, as Gregory drove me home, to begin sorting and packing essential items for the move, I found myself reflecting on the values that had shaped our family across generations. My parents had demonstrated care through personal sacrifice and direct engagement with Uncle Robert's needs. James and I had continued this tradition with his mother, integrating her fully into our household despite the disruptions to established routines. Gregory's approach, efficient, practical, solution-oriented, contained elements of this legacy, while somehow transforming it into something more managed than lived. The grab bars in the bathroom spoke of genuine concern, yet the small room at the far end of the house suggested containment rather than integration. The meticulous planning addressed logistical challenges while creating emotional distance that contrasted with the intimate care my parents had provided to Uncle Robert, or that James and I had offered his mother. Perhaps my perception was colored by the shock of diagnosis and the disorientation of rapid change. Perhaps Gregory's approach simply reflected the different relational styles that develop across generations as families evolve. The essential principle, family caring for family during illness, remained consistent, even if the implementation felt different from what I had experienced or provided in previous situations. As I began selecting clothing and personal items to take to Gregory's house that weekend, I found myself setting aside small objects that connected me to James and our shared history. The framed photo from our 30th anniversary trip to Maine, the worn paperback collection of poetry he had given me during our first year of marriage, the hand-knitted throw blanket his mother had created before her dementia progressed. These touchstones of memory and meaning would be essential companions during the medical journey ahead, tangible reminders of the love and connection that had defined my life before cancer threatened to redefine everything. The weekend arrived with unexpected complications. Gregory and Diane appeared Saturday morning as planned to help with packing and transportation, but their expressions suggested tension beyond the naturally stressful circumstances. "There's been a slight change of plans," Gregory explained as we sat at my kitchen table, Diane unusually quiet beside him. "Thomas has been selected for an advanced science program that will be using the guest room as his project space 3 afternoons a week. The timing is unfortunate, but it's a significant opportunity for his academic development." I waited, sensing there was more to this announcement than merely scheduling conflicts. "We've prepared an alternative space for you," he continued, his tone suggesting he was presenting a solution rather than creating a problem. "The workshop area in the garage is actually larger than the guest room, and we've installed proper insulation and climate control. It's quite comfortable." "The garage?" I repeated, certain I had misunderstood. "It's really more of a converted space now," Diane interjected, speaking for the first time since their arrival. "Gregory has installed a proper bed, small sitting area, and we've added a space heater and portable air conditioning unit. The half bath off the mudroom is just steps away." I struggled to process this revision to the already challenging adjustment ahead. "But the garage, wouldn't it make more sense for Thomas to use that space for his science projects? Especially with chemicals and experiments that might be better separated from the main living areas?" Gregory's expression hardened slightly. "Thomas needs proper lighting and access to household internet for his project documentation. The garage Wi-Fi signal is inconsistent at best." He paused, then added with a note of finality, "We've already made the arrangements, Mom. The garage space is actually quite nice now. You'll see when we get there." The efficiency with which they had pivoted from guest room to garage accommodation suggested this change had been planned well before today's conversation. I wondered how long they had known about Thomas's science program and when they had decided that my cancer treatment would be relegated to the converted workshop rather than the room initially offered. As we loaded my suitcases and selected personal items into Gregory's SUV, I found myself adding James's letter to my purse rather than packing it with other documents. Some private anchor to my previous life seemed essential as I faced this unexpected alteration to already difficult circumstances. The drive to Gregory's home passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Diane's occasional comments about neighborhood landmarks or updates on Thomas's recent academic achievements. When we arrived, Gregory led me directly to the side entrance of the garage, a space I had visited many times when it functioned as his workshop for occasional woodworking projects. The transformation was indeed substantial, though falling considerably, short of the quite nice description he had offered. A twin bed occupied one corner, with a small bedside table holding a lamp and digital clock. A modestly upholstered armchair that I recognized from their previous living room set faced a small television mounted on the wall. A dresser that had once belonged in Thomas's childhood bedroom provided storage, while a standing clothing rack offered hanging space for the few dresses and blouses I had packed. The concrete floor was partially covered by an area rug that didn't quite reach the edges of the space, and the walls, while freshly painted in a neutral beige, did nothing to disguise the fundamental nature of the structure. Despite the space heater and portable air conditioning unit flanking opposite walls, the garage retained the faint odors of motor oil, lawn equipment, and the various chemicals associated with household maintenance. "We installed proper outlets," Gregory pointed out, gesturing to the new electrical fixtures that supplemented the original garage wiring. "The TV is connected to our cable system, and this remote controls both that and the basic lights." He demonstrated the remote's functions, with evident pride in the technical solutions he had implemented. The Wi-Fi extender should provide adequate internet, though as I mentioned, the signal can be inconsistent. The refrigerator is small but functional for any medications that require cooling or snacks you might want to keep on hand. He opened the door of a dorm-sized refrigerator tucked beside the dresser. I stood in the center of the space, attempting to reconcile this reality with the guest room I had been promised just days earlier. While the practical accommodations addressed basic needs, the message conveyed by this arrangement was unmistakable. My presence during cancer treatment was being literally compartmentalized, separated from the main household in a way that minimized disruption to their established routines. The door between the garage and kitchen will remain unlocked, of course, Diane added, perhaps sensing my unspoken concerns. You'll have complete access to the house during waking hours. We just thought having your own separate space might provide more privacy and independence. The careful phrasing, during waking hours, suggested boundaries around when I would be welcome in the main living areas, while the emphasis on privacy seemed a thin disguise for containment rather than integration into family life during treatment. As they continued pointing out features of the converted garage space, my thoughts returned to Uncle Robert in our dining room, fully incorporated into daily family activities despite the inconvenience his presence created. I thought of James's mother at our kitchen table, confused but included, her dignity preserved through connection rather than efficient separation. It's certainly been thoughtfully arranged, I managed finally, unable to summon genuine enthusiasm but unwilling to appear ungrateful for efforts that had undoubtedly required significant work, if not the emotional engagement I had hoped for. We'll let you get settled, Gregory concluded, checking his watch. Dinner is at 6 in the kitchen. Thomas has a video gaming session with friends until then, and Diane and I need to review some household accounts. The Wi-Fi password is on the notepad beside the bed if you want to use your tablet. As they left through the side door that now constituted the entrance to my living quarters, I sank onto the edge of the twin bed, the reality of my situation settling over me with new clarity. The garage conversion represented more than just a physical space. It symbolized my son's approach to family obligation, fulfilling practical requirements while maintaining emotional and physical distance that preserved the primacy of his immediate family's needs and routines. The contrast with the caregiving values I had experienced and attempted to model throughout my life created a dissonance that transcended mere disappointment. This wasn't simply a matter of differing approaches to support during illness. It represented a fundamental divergence in understanding what family meant during crisis, showing up versus showing efficiency, integration versus accommodation, presence versus provision. As I began unpacking my limited possessions into the dresser drawers that still carried the faint scent of Thomas's childhood crayons and action figures, I wondered how this arrangement would evolve through months of treatment. The physical isolation of the garage space seemed to foreshadow an emotional separation that contradicted everything I had believed about our family's response to significant illness. James's words from his final letter echoed in my thoughts. These resources exist first and foremost for your comfort, security, and happiness. Do not feel obligated to preserve the estate for Gregory's future benefit at the expense of your own well-being. At the time, I had interpreted this guidance as permission to use our financial resources for potential care needs or experiences I might want to pursue in his absence. Now, as I arranged my medications on the small bedside table in a converted garage while cancer treatment loomed ahead, his words carried new significance, an almost prescient recognition that my needs might someday be subordinated to Gregory's. Priorities in ways James had perhaps anticipated, but I had never imagined possible. The first night in the garage conversion set the pattern for what would follow in the weeks ahead. After a stilted dinner where conversation revolved primarily around Thomas's school activities and Gregory's recent work projects, I retreated to my assigned space shortly after 8 p.m. when Diane mentioned their usual evening television routine. The message was subtle but clear. Family time had defined boundaries, and my presence was welcome within specific parameters that preserved their established patterns. As I settled into the narrow twin bed that first night, the sounds of the house gradually diminished, water running through pipes, the faint murmur of television dialogue, occasional laughter from upstairs, until a profound silence settled around me, broken only by the mechanical hum of the refrigerator and the intermittent cycling of the space. Heater attempting to maintain comfortable temperature in a structure never designed for habitation. Sleep proved elusive as I adjusted to the unfamiliar surroundings and contemplated the surgery scheduled for the following week. The emotional weight of facing serious medical intervention combined with the unexpected living arrangement created a restlessness that kept me awake well past midnight. When I finally did drift off, my sleep was repeatedly interrupted by discomfort from the unfamiliar mattress and the subtle but persistent garage odors that the fresh paint and air fresheners couldn't entirely mask. Morning brought Gregory knocking, precisely at 7:30 a.m., his voice carrying through the door with controlled cheerfulness. "Breakfast in 15 minutes, Mom. Coffee's already made." The household routine unfolded with the efficiency that characterized Gregory's approach to most situations. Breakfast was served at exactly 7:45, with places set at the kitchen island, rather than the formal dining room I could see through the adjoining doorway. Thomas mumbled good morning while scrolling through something on his phone, barely looking up as he mechanically consumed his cereal. Diane moved efficiently between refrigerator and counter, packing lunches with practiced precision while simultaneously supervising Thomas's progress through breakfast. "I've prepared a schedule for this week," Gregory announced, sliding a printed document across the counter toward me. "Pre-surgical appointments tomorrow and Wednesday, final consultation with Dr. Patel on Thursday, admission procedures Friday morning at 7 a.m. I've arranged to work remotely tomorrow and Wednesday, and I've taken Friday off completely to be at the hospital during your procedure." The organized approach to my medical care reflected the same practical efficiency as the garage conversion, addressing functional needs while maintaining a certain emotional distance that felt increasingly characteristic of our relationship. I found myself simultaneously grateful for his logistical support and hungry for connection that transcended scheduling and transportation coordination. "Thank you," I responded, taking the printed schedule and noting the detailed timeline laid out in 15-minute increments. "This is very helpful. Diane will be handling transportation to follow-up appointments next week while I'm at the conference in Chicago," Gregory continued, checking something on his phone as he spoke. "We've adjusted her work schedule to accommodate the post-surgical checkups." This was the first I'd heard of his planned absence during my immediate recovery period. "You'll be away next week, right after the surgery?" A flicker of something, perhaps guilt or defensiveness, crossed his expression before he assumed a matter-of-fact tone. "It's the annual industry conference. Been on the calendar for months. Unavoidable if I want to maintain client relationships. Diane has everything covered and I'll be back before you begin chemotherapy." Diane nodded from her position by the refrigerator, though her tight smile suggested this arrangement might have been a point of contention between them. "I've already spoken with my supervisor about flexible hours next week. It's absolutely manageable." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment along with a sip of coffee that suddenly tasted more bitter than moments before. The hierarchy of priorities was becoming increasingly clear. Gregory's professional obligations maintained precedence over direct involvement in my recovery, with Diane assigned to manage the logistical aspects of my care during his absence. "I appreciate you both making these arrangements," I said finally, unwilling to create conflict before surgery that would only increase everyone's stress. "The schedule looks very comprehensive." Thomas glanced up from his phone long enough to ask, "Can I still have Matt over on Saturday? Or is that not happening now because of—" He gestured vaguely in my direction, clearly uncomfortable directly referencing my medical situation. "We discussed this already," Gregory responded with slight impatience. Grandma will still be in the hospital on Saturday. Your social plans aren't affected. The phrasing, your social plans aren't affected, crystallized something I had been sensing since arriving. My presence during illness was being managed specifically to minimize impact on their established routines, a consideration that seemed to take precedence over integration or adaptation. Cancer treatment was being accommodated, rather than embraced as a family challenge requiring collective adjustment. The days leading up to surgery passed in a blur of medical appointments, paperwork, and uncomfortable nights in the garage bedroom. Gregory attended the major consultations as promised, taking detailed notes and asking pertinent questions about recovery protocols and support requirements. His approach remained consistently practical, focused on procedures, medications, and physical care needs rather than emotional support or reassurance. Diane maintained polite attentiveness when present, though her involvement was primarily logistical, confirming appointment times, arranging transportation, ensuring appropriate clothing was prepared for hospital admission. Our interactions remained cordial but distant, marked by the careful boundaries she had maintained throughout our relationship. Thomas largely avoided direct engagement, disappearing to his room or friends' homes when not specifically required. At family meals. His discomfort with serious illness was typical of his age, though I wondered how much his behavior reflected the emotional tone Gregory and Diane had established regarding my presence during treatment. The evening before surgery. As I sat in the kitchen completing pre-admission paperwork, Maria unexpectedly appeared at the side door that connected to my garage space. Her familiar face triggered an emotional response I hadn't anticipated. A rush of genuine warmth that contrasted sharply with the managed care I'd been experiencing. "Mrs. Williams," she greeted me, stepping hesitantly into the kitchen as if uncertain of her welcome in this space. "I hope I'm not interrupting. Mr. Gregory said it would be okay to visit before your surgery tomorrow." "Maria!" I exclaimed, rising to embrace her with genuine delight. "I didn't realize you were coming." "I brought you something," she explained, setting a small insulated bag on the counter. "My sister's special soup, the one she had before her cancer treatments. She always said it gave her strength." She removed a container from the bag, the glass still warm through the kitchen towel wrapped around it, and fresh pan dulce from the bakery near my apartment, a little sweetness before hospital food. The thoughtful gestures, practical nourishment combined with cultural comfort, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Maria's attention to both physical and emotional needs represented exactly the kind of holistic care I had provided to others throughout my life, and found myself craving now. "You're very kind," I managed, wiping away tears that seemed to spring from a well of emotion deeper than the immediate circumstance warranted. "Would you like to sit for a moment? Gregory and Diane are at Thomas's school event, so it's just me tonight." Maria glanced at her watch, then nodded. "For a little while, my son is picking me up in 30 minutes. She settled opposite me at the kitchen island, her presence bringing a comfortable familiarity that had been noticeably absent in my interactions with Gregory's family. "How are you really feeling?" she asked directly, her gaze steady and attentive, in a way that invited honest response rather than polite reassurance. "Scared?" I admitted, the simple truth emerging easily in her presence. "Not just about the surgery, but everything that comes after. The chemo, the recovery, being dependent on others for months." She nodded, understanding without minimizing. "Fear is natural with cancer. My sister said accepting the fear without letting it control you is important. It is okay to be scared and still be strong. The permission to acknowledge fear without shame felt like a gift after days of Gregory's relentlessly positive efficiency that left little space for expressing uncertainty or vulnerability. Maria's approach, acknowledging reality while offering support, created room for authentic exchange that honored the complexity of serious illness rather than reducing it to schedules and medical protocols. "Your living space," she continued, hesitantly, glancing toward the garage door. It is comfortable enough. When Mr. Gregory asked me to clean it last week, I tried to make it nice, but— You cleaned the garage conversion? I asked, surprised by this information. Maria nodded. Last Thursday, while you were at your doctor appointment, Mr. Gregory asked me to prepare the space and make it suitable. She hesitated, then added diplomatically, I was surprised they did not offer a room inside the house. There are 3 bedrooms upstairs that are not used except for occasional guests. This confirmation that the garage accommodation had been planned well before the explanation about Thomas's science program created a renewed sense of disappointment. The revelation that spare bedrooms existed upstairs further underscored how deliberately I had been positioned at the periphery rather than integrated into the household. It's adequate, I responded, unwilling to burden Maria with complaints about arrangements she had no power to change. Gregory installed good heating and cooling systems. Maria's expression suggested she understood far more than my words conveyed. Her perceptiveness heightened by years of working in homes where family dynamics played out in spaces and arrangements rather than direct communication. If you need anything during your recovery that they do not provide, please call me. I am happy to bring things or help in any way. Her offer, extending beyond professional obligation into genuine concern, created a momentary tightness in my throat. Thank you, Maria. That means a great deal to me. We spoke for another 20 minutes about her children's recent accomplishments and her sister's successful cancer recovery, conversation that normalized serious illness while maintaining optimism about treatment outcomes. When her son texted that he was waiting outside, she gathered her purse and squeezed my hand before leaving. I will pray for you tomorrow, she said simply, and I will check on you when you return from the hospital. Recovery is not just medical. It is also about spirit. After she departed, I returned to the garage space that now constituted my living quarters, the soup and pan dolce carefully carried along. Sitting on the edge of the twin bed, I found myself contemplating the contrast between Maria's brief visit and the consistent interactions with Gregory and Diane. The difference between managed care and genuine connection, between accommodating illness and embracing the person experiencing it. The surgery itself went as well as could be expected, according to Dr. Patel's report delivered in the recovery room where Gregory sat beside my bed, tablet in hand as he documented medication, schedules and post-operative instructions. The tumor had been successfully removed, along with affected surrounding tissue, though pathology would require several days to determine whether cancer cells had spread beyond the surgical margins. You did great, Mom, Gregory assured me, his hand briefly touching mine before returning to the tablet where he continued organizing recovery information into categories and subheadings. Dr. Patel says your vital signs remained stable throughout the procedure, and your initial recovery indicators are all positive. The clinical assessment, focusing on medical metrics rather than personal experience, reflected the approach that had characterized his support throughout this process. While I appreciated his presence and attention to practical details, I found myself longing for comfort that extended beyond vital signs and recovery indicators to acknowledgement of the emotional impact of such significant medical intervention. The 5 days in the hospital passed in a blur of pain medication, nursing assessments, and brief family visits carefully scheduled around Gregory and Diane's work commitments and Thomas's activities. Gregory appeared each evening after work, staying approximately 1 hour while reviewing medical updates and coordinating discharge plans with increasing attention as the week progressed. Diane visited twice, bringing flowers and magazines during brief afternoon stops between work and picking up Thomas from after-school activities. Thomas came once, clearly uncomfortable in the hospital environment. His attention focused primarily on his phone while Gregory discussed recovery protocols with the nursing staff. To my surprise, Maria appeared on my 3rd day post-surgery, her familiar face bringing immediate comfort as she entered the hospital room carrying a small plant and book of poetry. My shift finishes at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays, she explained, settling into the visitor's chair. I thought you might like some company before your family arrives later." The thoughtful visit, arranged around her work schedule but motivated by genuine concern, brought tears to my eyes that I quickly tried to blink away. "That's very kind of you," I managed, genuinely touched by her consideration. "How are you feeling?" she asked, leaning forward slightly as if to compensate for the institutional distance created by the hospital bed and monitoring equipment. "Sore," I admitted. "And tired in a way that feels different from normal fatigue. Deeper somehow, as if even my cells are exhausted." She nodded with understanding that suggested personal familiarity with serious illness beyond professional knowledge. My sister described it as bone tired, fatigue that reaches places you didn't know could feel tired. It improves with time, but healing takes patience. We spoke for nearly an hour about everything from her daughter's recent promotion to books. We had both enjoyed conversation that carefully acknowledged my medical situation without allowing it to become the sole focus of our interaction. When she rose to leave, promising to check on me again after discharge, I found myself more reluctant to see her go than I had been when Gregory departed after his efficient but emotionally distant visits. "Thank you for coming," I said, reaching for her hand as she prepared to leave. "It means more than I can adequately express." Maria squeezed my hand gently. "You have always been kind to me, Mrs. Williams. Not just a good employer, but someone who saw me as a person. Not just someone who cleaned your home. That matters, especially during difficult times." Her words, acknowledging our human connection beyond transactional relationship, highlighted exactly what had been missing in Gregory's approach to my care. While he managed logistics with impressive efficiency, the essential recognition of personhood beyond patient status had been notably absent in his support. The day before discharge, as Gregory reviewed final arrangements for my return to his home, Dr. Patel arrived with the pathology results that would determine next steps in treatment. His expression as he entered carried a gravity that immediately suggested the news was not what we had hoped. "The tumor was successfully removed," he began, his tone professional yet compassionate. "But pathology has confirmed cancer cells in several lymph nodes, indicating progression beyond the primary site. The staging remains at 3, as we initially suspected." Gregory immediately shifted into information-gathering mode, asking specific questions about implications for treatment protocols and survival statistics. His approach, focused on data and procedural adjustments, created emotional distance. From the human reality of this diagnosis, my cancer had spread, necessitating more aggressive treatment with less certain outcomes. "We'll begin chemotherapy as soon as post-surgical healing permits," Dr. Patel continued, addressing me directly rather than responding exclusively to Gregory's questions. "Based on your recovery progress, I recommend starting 3 weeks from surgery, which would be the week after next." Gregory nodded, making notes on his tablet. "That aligns with my return from Chicago. I'll be back Monday, so treatment starting midweek would work with my schedule." The phrasing, "work with my schedule," created momentary dissonance, as if my cancer treatment were being coordinated around his professional calendar rather than medical necessity. I pushed aside the fleeting hurt, focusing instead on practical questions about chemotherapy protocols and side effect management. Dr. Patel outlined the treatment plan with careful attention to both medical details and quality of life considerations. "The side effects can be significant," he acknowledged, "but we have increasingly effective management approaches. Having consistent support during treatment will be essential, particularly during the first few days after each cycle when effects tend to be most pronounced." Gregory nodded confidently. "We've made arrangements for Mom to stay with us throughout treatment. The space is prepared, and Diane has adjusted her work schedule to provide transportation to appointments." The assurance, presented with professional certainty that matched Dr. Patel's clinical confidence, created an impression of comprehensive support that contrasted with my lived experience in the garage conversion and peripheral inclusion in family life. The disparity between presentation and reality felt increasingly significant as I contemplated months of chemotherapy, while effectively sequestered from genuine integration into the household. Discharge day arrived with a flurry of paperwork. Final instructions and prescription coordination managed with characteristic efficiency by Gregory, who had taken a morning off work to transport me from hospital to home. As the nurse wheeled me to the hospital entrance where Gregory waited with the car, I found myself experiencing unexpected apprehension about returning to the garage space that now constituted my living quarters during serious illness. The drive passed largely in silence. Gregory focused on traffic while I processed the reality of cancer that had spread beyond its initial location, requiring aggressive treatment with uncertain outcomes. When we arrived at his home, he helped me carefully from the car to the side entrance that led directly to the garage conversion, bypassing the main house entirely. "I've stocked the refrigerator with easy foods," he explained as he settled me into the armchair, arranging pillows to support my still healing surgical site. "Your medications are organized in the daily container on the nightstand, and I've put the hospital's discharge instructions in this binder for easy reference." The practical preparations, addressing physical needs and medical requirements, reflected the same approach that had characterized his support throughout this process. Each functional element had been considered and addressed, while the emotional and relational aspects of serious illness remained largely unacknowledged. "Thank you," I said, genuinely appreciative of his attention to practical details despite my hunger for connection that transcended logistics. "You've been very thorough with the arrangements." Gregory nodded, checking his watch with a gesture that had become familiar during hospital visits, the unconscious movement that signaled attention divided between present circumstances and pending obligations elsewhere. "I need to head to the office for an afternoon meeting, but Diane will be home around 4. Thomas has soccer practice until 5:30, so the house should be quiet for your rest." The information, framed as consideration for my recovery needs, highlighted, again, how my presence was being managed alongside rather than integrated into family life. The garage placement ensured minimal disruption to household routines while maintaining boundaries around when and how I would interact with the family during treatment. "I'll be fine," I assured him, unwilling to express disappointment that might create additional tension in an already stressful situation. "The doctor said rest is the primary prescription for the next few days anyway." Gregory seemed relieved by my acquiescence, perhaps having anticipated more difficult adjustment to the isolated recovery space. "Great. I've left the house key on the nightstand in case you need anything from inside, though we've tried to ensure everything essential is already here in your space." After a brief and somewhat awkward attempt at adjusting pillows to maximize my comfort, he departed with promises to check in that evening after his meeting. The sound of the side door closing was followed moments later by his car starting in the driveway, leaving me alone in the converted garage with the low hum of the space heater and refrigerator creating white noise that emphasized rather than disguised the fundamental solitude of my situation. The remainder of that day established patterns that would characterize the following weeks. Diane arrived precisely at 4 hours as promised, bringing a tray with soup and crackers that she placed on the small side table before asking appropriate but somewhat distant questions about my pain levels and medication timing. Her manner was unfailingly polite, yet maintained the careful boundaries that had always defined our relationship: concerned, but not intimate; attentive, but not particularly warm. "Is there anything specific you need from the store?" she asked, after completing what felt like a mental checklist of appropriate caregiver inquiries. "I'm making a run tomorrow morning before work." "I think Gregory has covered the essentials," I responded, unwilling to impose additional requests that might be perceived as burdensome. "But thank you for asking," she nodded, seeming relieved by my self-sufficiency. "We usually eat dinner around 6:30, but I can bring a tray out earlier if you're hungry. Or later, if you prefer to rest now." The phrasing, "bring a tray out," solidified what had been implicit in various arrangements and interactions. I would be eating separately rather than joining family meals during recovery. Despite being technically well enough to sit at a table for short periods, as the discharge instructions had indicated was permissible and even beneficial for preventing complications. Perhaps around 6B, I suggested, trying to find compromise between their established routine and my increasingly apparent status as adjacently accommodated rather than included. But please don't go to any special trouble. Simple food is fine, while I'm adjusting to the medications. Diane seemed satisfied with this arrangement, departing with assurances that she would return with dinner at the appointed time. True to her word, she appeared at precisely 6 gone with a tray containing a modest portion of what appeared to be the family meal, carefully arranged on a plate with a paper napkin and plastic utensils that eliminated the need to return for dish. Collection later. The evening passed in solitude, punctuated by brief visits. Gregory stopping by after dinner to deliver evening medications and check surgical dressings, Thomas appearing briefly at his father's insistence to mumble goodnight, before disappearing back into the main house. By 9, the sounds of the household had settled into distant murmurs and occasional laughter from television programs I couldn't see, emphasizing the separation between their continuing normal routines and my isolated recovery in the converted garage space. As I attempted to find comfortable positioning on the narrow twin bed that night, physical pain from surgery combined with emotional discomfort about the months of treatment ahead in these circumstances created a profound sense of vulnerability I hadn't experienced since James's passing. The stark contrast between my current situation and the care James and I had provided his mother during her illness, fully integrated into our household despite the inconvenience her condition created, highlighted how dramatically Gregory's approach diverged from the family values we had attempted to model throughout his upbringing. The following days established a routine of careful but distant attention to medical needs while maintaining clear boundaries around household integration. Meals appeared on trays at regular intervals, medications were delivered with precise timing, and brief check-ins occurred at predictable moments that suggested scheduled obligation rather than spontaneous concern. Gregory departed for his Chicago conference as planned 5 days after my hospital discharge, leaving Diane with detailed instructions about medication schedules and a printed list of warning signs that would warrant medical contact. His approach to my care had assumed increasingly managerial aspects, delegating specific tasks, establishing clear protocols, and maintaining emotional distance that transformed what should have been intimate family support during serious illness into something resembling professional case management. The morning after Gregory's departure, as I sat in the garage space attempting to find comfortable positioning that minimized surgical discomfort, an unexpected knock at the side door interrupted my solitude. Maria stood outside, her expression combining concern and determination as she waited for my response. Maria, I greeted her with genuine pleasure as I carefully made my way to the door. I wasn't expecting you today. Mr. Gregory arranged for me to clean while he is away, she explained, following me back to the armchair where I gingerly resettled. But I came early to see how you are recovering before I begin working. The simple prioritization, placing human connection before task completion, created immediate contrast with the efficiency-focused support I had been receiving from Gregory and Diane. Maria's approach centered relationship alongside practical assistance, rather than subordinating connection to logistical management. The surgery went as well as could be expected, I explained, finding myself hungry for conversation that acknowledged both medical reality and personal experience. But they found cancer in the lymph nodes, so I'll need chemotherapy starting next week. Maria nodded, her expression reflecting understanding without pity, the balanced recognition of serious circumstances that neither minimized reality nor removed hope. My sister had similar findings. The treatments were difficult, but she found ways to manage. I will share what helped her if you would like. I would appreciate that very much, I replied, genuinely grateful for information grounded in lived experience, rather than the clinical descriptions Gregory had compiled from medical websites and hospital literature. As Maria prepared to begin her cleaning duties, she hesitated, glancing around the converted garage with an expression that suggested professional assessment combined with personal concern. "This space," she began carefully, "it is not ideal for someone recovering from surgery and preparing for chemotherapy. The concrete holds dampness that isn't good for healing, and the air circulation is poor despite the units Mr. Gregory installed." Her diplomatic phrasing acknowledged both Gregory's efforts and their fundamental inadequacy for serious illness. Recovery. The professional assessment, based on years of experience maintaining healthy home environments, confirmed my own sense that the garage conversion represented compromised accommodation rather than appropriate care setting for cancer. Treatment. "It's what's available," I responded simply, unwilling to criticize Gregory's arrangements to someone he employed, despite the growing trust between Maria and myself. She nodded, her expression suggesting she understood more than my words conveyed. "I will make it as comfortable as possible while I am here today. Fresh bedding, thorough dusting, perhaps some flowers to brighten the space." The thoughtful additions, addressing aesthetic and emotional aspects alongside practical cleaning, highlighted again the difference between Maria's holistic approach to support and Gregory's more narrowly defined focus on medical logistics. Where he provided medication schedules and symptom checklists, Maria brought flowers and companionship that acknowledged the person beyond the patient status cancer treatment had conferred. As the days passed in the garage conversion, Maria's visits became bright spots in an otherwise isolating recovery. Unlike Gregory's schedule-driven appearances or Diane's careful but distant attention to physical needs, Maria brought genuine connection that acknowledged both my illness and my humanity beyond patient status. She arrived each Tuesday and Thursday, as arranged by Gregory, ostensibly to clean the main house and maintain my garage quarters. What began as brief conversation before she started her official duties gradually expanded into meaningful exchanges that provided both practical support and emotional sustenance during increasingly difficult circumstances. My sister found these helpful during her treatments, Maria explained during one visit, setting a small bag on the bedside table. Ginger candies for nausea, special tea that settles the stomach, and lotion that doesn't irritate sensitive skin during chemotherapy. Small things, but they made difficult days more manageable. The thoughtful gifts, addressing specific challenges of cancer treatment with solutions proven through personal experience rather than medical literature, represented exactly the kind of holistic support I had provided to others throughout my life and found myself craving now. Maria's approach integrated physical comfort with emotional connection, creating care that nourished spirit alongside body. "You're very kind," I acknowledged, genuinely touched by her consideration. "Especially since this isn't really part of your job." Maria's expression softened as she arranged the items beside my medications. "Some things are beyond job descriptions, Mrs. Williams. You have always treated me with respect and dignity, not just as someone who cleaned your home, but as a person with value. That matters, especially when others may not see the same." Her reference to others remained diplomatic, but the implication was clear. The contrast between her approach and Gregory's efficient but emotionally distant support had become increasingly evident as days passed in the isolated garage space with minimal integration into household activities beyond scheduled medical check-ins. "Gregory is doing his best," I found myself saying, a lifetime habit of defending my son emerging despite growing disappointment in his approach to my care. "He's always been more practical than emotional, like his father in many ways." Maria nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by this explanation. "Mr. James may have been practical, but he had a generous heart. When I started cleaning your home 15 years ago, he always asked about my children, remembered their names and ages. He increased my payment when my son started college, without me asking. Practical, yes, but also kind." This simple observation, highlighting the crucial difference between James's balanced approach and Gregory's increasingly cold efficiency, crystallized something I had been reluctantly acknowledging throughout my time in the garage conversion. My son's management of my cancer treatment reflected not merely different expression of family values, but fundamental divergence from the principles James and I had attempted to instill throughout his upbringing. Gregory returned from his Chicago conference the following Monday, stopping briefly in the garage space to deliver a schedule for my first chemotherapy appointment that Wednesday. His approach remained consistently focused on logistics rather than emotional support, compiling treatment information and side effect management protocols without acknowledging the fear and uncertainty that accompanied this new phase of illness. "I've arranged for Diane to drive you on Wednesday," he explained, referencing his tablet calendar as he spoke. "I have client meetings that can't be rescheduled, but I'll join you for the second treatment in 3 weeks when my schedule permits." The key. Prioritization, placing client meetings above accompanying his mother to her first chemotherapy session, created momentary speechlessness as I processed the implications. While I understood professional obligations carried significance, the hierarchy of values demonstrated through this decision highlighted how dramatically Gregory's approach diverged from what James and I had modeled throughout his childhood. "That's fine," I managed finally, unwilling to create conflict that would only add tension to an already difficult situation. "Diane has been very helpful with appointments." Gregory nodded, apparently satisfied that practical arrangements addressed all relevant concerns. "The first treatment typically causes less severe reactions than subsequent cycles, according to Dr. Patel's materials. Still, we've prepared for potential nausea and fatigue. The refrigerator is stocked with easily digestible foods, and I've added an emesis basin to your bedside supplies." The clinical terminology, emesis basin, rather than the more human being, exemplified the emotional distance Gregory maintained even while addressing intimate aspects of illness. His approach transformed cancer treatment from human experience into project management, with symptoms categorized as logistics requiring solutions rather than suffering warranting compassion alongside practical support. Wednesday arrived with a clear blue autumn sky that contrasted sharply with the heaviness in my chest as I prepared for the first chemotherapy session. Diane arrived precisely at the appointed time, her manner efficient but not unkind as she helped me into the passenger seat of her SUV. "I've brought water and crackers," she mentioned as we drove toward the oncology center. Gregory's research indicated small, bland snacks can help manage nausea during treatment. The consideration, practical yet impersonal, reflected the careful balance Diane had maintained throughout our relationship. While never hostile, she had established clear boundaries around emotional engagement that continued even during serious illness, providing necessary assistance without the warmth or connection that might have eased the journey. The oncology center presented a paradoxical combination of clinical efficiency and attempted warmth, medical equipment alongside comfortable recliners, IV poles beside small tables holding magazines and puzzle books. The staff greeted new patients with practiced compassion that acknowledged both medical reality and human experience, creating an environment that recognized the person beyond the diagnosis. "First time?" asked the woman in the recliner beside mine, as the nurse finished connecting my IV. Her headscarf and thin frame suggested she was already well into her treatment journey, though her smile remained warm and her eyes alert. "Yes," I admitted, trying to control the trembling in my hands as the nurse prepared the pre-medication that would precede the actual chemotherapy drugs. "Stage 3 ovarian. You?" "Breast, stage 2, 4 months in," she replied with remarkable matter-of-factness. "I'm Judith. The first session is the scariest because you don't know what to expect. It gets more manageable once you develop your routine." Her straightforward acknowledgement, neither minimizing reality nor surrendering to despair, created immediate connection that transcended our different diagnoses and circumstances. We spoke throughout the 3-hour treatment session, sharing experiences and small strategies for managing both medical challenges and emotional aspects of serious illness. Diane had settled in the waiting area with her laptop, appearing periodically to check whether I needed anything while maintaining focus on work projects that clearly occupied her attention. Her approach, present but not engaged, reflected the same careful balance she had maintained throughout my stay in their home, providing necessary support without emotional investment that might disrupt established boundaries. By the time treatment concluded, the anti-nausea medications were beginning to wear off, and the first waves of chemotherapy side effects created increasing discomfort that transformed the drive home into an exercise in maintaining composure. Diane noticed my pallor and increasing restlessness, accelerating slightly as we approached their neighborhood. Gregory researched that the first few hours after treatment can be challenging, she observed, her tone suggesting clinical observation rather than emotional concern. He's prepared the garage space with everything you might need for symptom management. The garage, referred to without qualification as my designated space rather than temporary accommodation during illness, had indeed been stocked with medical supplies arranged with characteristic efficiency. Medications were organized by symptom category. The small refrigerator contained electrolyte drinks and plain yogurt, and multiple plastic receptacles had been positioned strategically within reach of both bed and armchair. The practical preparations, addressing physical needs with thorough attention to detail, contrasted sharply with the emotional isolation of returning to the converted garage rather than being integrated into the main household during this vulnerable period. As nausea intensified and fatigue descended with overwhelming weight, the fundamental loneliness of serious illness without meaningful connection became increasingly apparent with each passing hour. Gregory appeared briefly that evening, tablet in hand, as he methodically documented symptoms and medication timing with the detached precision that characterized his approach to my care. His attention remained focused on medical management rather than emotional support, recording data points without acknowledging the human experiencing gathering suffering as chemotherapy drugs began their systemic assault on both cancerous and healthy cells. The first 24 to 48 hours typically present the most acute reactions, he noted, consulting reference materials as he spoke. Diane will check on you hourly tomorrow while working from home. I've compiled a symptom scale for you to indicate severity levels without needing to speak if talking becomes difficult. The consideration, recognizing potential difficulty with verbal communication during intense nausea, demonstrated thoughtfulness within the narrowly defined parameters Gregory had established for cancer support. His approach addressed anticipated physical needs while maintaining emotional distance that transformed what should have been intimate family care during serious illness into something resembling clinical case management with familial obligation, rather than connection as motivating factor. That night, as side effects intensified into full systemic response, the fundamental isolation of the garage space created new dimensions of difficulty beyond physical suffering. Each episode of nausea and vomiting occurred in solitude, broken only by Diane's scheduled checks, which focused on medication administration and hydration status, rather than the comfort of compassionate presence during distress. The contrast with how James and I had cared for his mother during her final illness created painful clarity about the divergence between values we had attempted to model and Gregory's current approach to family obligation. Where we had maintained constant presence during her difficult nights, taking turns sitting beside her bed, holding her hand during distress, providing comfort that transcended mere physical care, I now faced the darkness alone between scheduled checks. The space heater's mechanical hum an inadequate substitute for human connection during vulnerability. The pattern established during that first chemotherapy cycle continued through subsequent treatments, Gregory arranging logistics with impressive efficiency while maintaining emotional distance that rendered his support transactional rather than relational. Diane provided transportation and basic care within carefully defined parameters that preserved the boundaries she had always maintained. In our relationship, Thomas made increasingly rare appearances, his adolescent discomfort with serious illness combining with the physical separation created by my garage quarters to minimize our interaction beyond brief, obligatory greetings when directly prompted by his parents. This carefully managed existence, addressing medical needs while separating me from genuine family integration, might have continued indefinitely had circumstances not forced unexpected revelation through channels no one could have anticipated. 10 weeks into chemotherapy, with my body responding to treatment but increasingly weakened by cumulative side effects, Gregory arranged what he described as a family meeting to discuss financial matters related to my ongoing care. His manner as he entered the garage space that evening carried unusual formality, with Diane accompanying him rather than remaining in the main house, as was her typical pattern during his visits. "We need to discuss some practical considerations," he began, settling into the chair positioned across from where I rested on the twin bed, my body still recovering from the previous day's treatment cycle. "The financial aspects of long-term care planning." The phrasing, long-term care planning, rather than recovery expectations, immediately suggested something beyond routine discussion of current medical expenses. Gregory's expression combined determination with carefully controlled emotion that indicated significant conversation ahead. "Your treatments and care requirements are creating unanticipated expenses," he continued, referencing notes on his tablet. "While your insurance covers most direct medical costs, the ancillary expenses and impact on our household resources weren't fully factored into our initial arrangements. The business-like approach, framing cancer care in terms of resource allocation and financial impact, created immediate dissonance against what should have been family support during serious illness." Gregory's tone suggested discussing investment strategy rather than his mother's cancer treatment, transforming health crisis into balance sheet consideration with unsettling detachment. "What specific expenses are concerning you?" I asked, trying to understand the direction of this unexpected conversation. "It's not simply direct expenses," Gregory explained with practiced patience that carried subtle condescension. "It's opportunity costs and resource allocation. Thomas needs SAT preparation services this year, critical for his college applications next year. The garage conversion required significant investment beyond what we initially anticipated. Diane's reduced work hours to accommodate your transportation needs affect our household income." Each item, presented as equivalent consideration alongside my cancer treatment, revealed priority hierarchies that contrasted sharply with the family values James and I had attempted to model throughout Gregory's upbringing. The implied equivalence between SAT preparation and cancer support demonstrated value systems fundamentally misaligned with what we had practiced and taught regarding family obligation during serious illness. "I see," I responded carefully, still uncertain where this inventory of costs was leading. "What exactly are you proposing?" Gregory exchanged glances with Diane before continuing with increasing confidence, suggesting rehearsed conversation rather than spontaneous discussion. "We believe it would be financially prudent to liquidate some of your investment assets to contribute toward these expenses. Dad left you well-positioned with resources specifically intended for your care needs. It seems logical to utilize those assets rather than depleting our current income and educational savings." The proposal that I should finance my own cancer care while living in their converted garage created momentary speechlessness as I processed its implications. Beyond the financial suggestion itself, the approach revealed how Gregory had fundamentally reframed family obligation from values-based commitment to transactional arrangement with calculated costs and benefits. "I see," I repeated, gathering thoughts while managing physical weakness that made complex conversation particularly challenging after recent treatment. "You'd like me to pay you for staying in the garage during my cancer treatment?" Gregory's expression tightened slightly at this direct characterization. "That's an oversimplification. We're providing comprehensive support during extremely challenging circumstances. The garage conversion, transportation coordination, Symptom: management, meal preparation. These represent significant resource investment that impacts our entire household. Using assets Dad specifically designated for your care needs seems aligned with his intentions. The careful phrasing, presenting financial request as reasonable alignment with James's intentions rather than fundamental violation of family values, demonstrated remarkable capacity for reframing exploitation as appropriate resource allocation. The emotional distance that had characterized Gregory's approach to my cancer care had apparently extended to financial calculation that transformed family support during illness into billable services with associated costs. "I need some time to consider this," I responded, unwilling to make significant financial decisions while physically compromised by recent chemotherapy. "Perhaps we could revisit the conversation next week when I'm feeling stronger." Gregory appeared ready to press the matter before Diane touched his arm lightly, a silent signal that apparently communicated the wisdom of postponement. He nodded, reluctantly, returning the tablet to its case with controlled movements that suggested suppressed frustration. "Of course, we can discuss specific numbers once you've had time to review your financial situation." His tone carried certainty that the conversation would resume with essentially unchanged proposal, merely delayed rather than reconsidered. After they departed to the main house, I sat in growing clarity about how dramatically circumstances had diverged from everything James and I had believed about family support during serious illness. The garage placement, minimal integration into household activities, and now financial calculation of comprehensive support revealed values fundamentally misaligned with what we had practiced and taught throughout Gregory's upbringing. James's letter, still kept in my bedside drawer as touchstone to values we had shared, seemed almost prescient in its guidance. "These resources exist first and foremost for your comfort, security, and happiness. Do not feel obligated to preserve the estate for Gregory's future benefit at the expense of your own well-being." At the time, I had interpreted this advice as permission to use our financial resources for potential care needs or experiences I might want to pursue in his absence. Now, as I contemplated my son's expectation that I finance my own cancer care while isolated in a garage conversion, James's words carried new significance, an almost anticipatory recognition of priorities Gregory might eventually demonstrate, despite the values we had attempted to instill. The following morning, as I carefully made my way to the kitchen for breakfast during one of my stronger post-treatment periods, I overheard conversation that confirmed growing concerns about Gregory's fundamental approach to my illness and presence in their home. "Ridiculous that we're still handling everything ourselves." Gregory's voice carried clearly through the partially open doorway as I approached. "Her assets are sitting untouched while we're rearranging our entire lives and finances around cancer treatments that could continue indefinitely." "She might have responded better if you hadn't opened with Thomas's SAT prep costs alongside her cancer expenses," Diane responded, her tone suggesting this represented continued discussion, rather than new conversation. The timing seemed insensitive right after treatment. "There's never a good time," Gregory countered with evident frustration. Meanwhile, the inheritance that should eventually support Thomas's education and our retirement is being preserved, while our current resources are drained by transportation costs and household adjustments. The phrasing, "the inheritance that should eventually support Thomas's education," revealed expectations that clarified much about Gregory's approach to my care. The financial resources James had explicitly designated for my security and well-being were being viewed as delayed inheritance, temporarily inconveniencing his access through my continued existence and associated cancer treatment. "At least the garage keeps the disruption contained," he continued, unaware of my presence just outside the doorway. "Can you imagine if she were actually living in the house during all this? The bathroom would be perpetually occupied, the kitchen, schedule impossible to maintain, Thomas constantly disrupted by medical equipment and visitors." This confirmation that the garage placement had been deliberately designed to contain disruption rather than resulting from space limitations created painful clarity about my status within their home. Far from being integrated family member receiving support during serious illness, I had been strategically compartmentalized to minimize impact on established routines while preserving access to practical assistance that could now apparently be itemized and billed to my personal accounts. I retreated quietly to the garage space without making my presence known, the overhead conversation having provided unwelcome but necessary insight into Gregory's fundamental approach to my illness. The values disconnect between what James and I had modeled throughout his upbringing and his current behavior extended beyond different expressions of care into fundamentally divergent understanding of family obligation during crisis. As I settled back onto the twin bed, physically exhausted from even the brief exertion of walking to and from the kitchen doorway, an unexpected knock at the side door interrupted my troubled thoughts. Maria stood outside, arriving earlier than her usual Thursday cleaning time, her expression conveying concern that suggested awareness of my recent treatment cycle. "Mrs. Williams," she greeted me softly as I answered the door. "I hope to check on you before beginning work today. Mr. Gregory mentioned yesterday was treatment day." The simple acknowledgement, recognizing both medical reality and human experience, highlighted again the contrast between Maria's holistic approach to support and Gregory's increasingly transactional framework. Where he calculated costs and contained disruption, she consistently prioritized connection alongside practical assistance. "Yesterday was difficult," I acknowledged, as she followed me back to the bed where I carefully resettled. The cumulative effect seemed to intensify with each treatment cycle. Maria nodded with understanding that reflected both personal experience through her sister's illness and genuine concern rather than clinical assessment. My sister found the same pattern. Each treatment left her feeling she had less reserve for the next one, but she completed the full protocol, and 5 years later, she remains cancer-free. The balanced perspective, acknowledging difficulty while maintaining hope through concrete example, provided exactly the kind of support I had increasingly recognized as absent in Gregory's approach to my care. Maria's consistent integration of practical assistance with emotional connection demonstrated exactly the values James and I had attempted to model throughout Gregory's upbringing, values his current behavior suggested had never been truly internalized, despite our efforts. As Maria prepared to begin her scheduled cleaning duties, she hesitated, her expression suggesting internal debate about appropriate boundaries. "Forgive me if this is not my place," she began carefully, "but I am concerned about your recovery in this space. The concrete foundation holds dampness that isn't healthy for someone with compromised immunity from chemotherapy. The air circulation remains poor despite the units installed, and temperature fluctuations are difficult to control in a structure not designed for habitation." The professional assessment, delivered with diplomatic awareness of her position but genuine concern for my well-being, confirmed what I had increasingly recognized through accumulating respiratory discomfort and persistent chill that even the space heater couldn't fully address. The garage conversion, while superficially adequate, created health challenges beyond the unavoidable difficulties of cancer treatment itself. "I've been having increasing breathing difficulty," I acknowledged. Trust in Maria's discretion, overcoming reluctance to criticize arrangements Gregory had presented as comprehensive support. The doctors initially attributed it to treatment effects, but it seems worse here than during hospital stays. Maria nodded, validating my experience rather than dismissing it. Garage spaces often develop hidden mold that affects air quality. The basic structure isn't designed to prevent moisture infiltration the way proper living spaces are required to do. For someone with normal immunity, it might cause minor symptoms, but during chemotherapy when your system is already compromised. She left the implication unspoken, but clear. The garage placement potentially exacerbated health challenges beyond cancer treatment itself, creating additional risk during period of maximum vulnerability. This recognition that my accommodations might actually be harmful rather than merely uncomfortable crystallized growing awareness that fundamental change was necessary, regardless of family disruption such assertion might create. "I've been considering other arrangements," I admitted, the overhead conversation having confirmed that continuing current living situation would likely involve financial expectations alongside physical isolation. "My home is still vacant, though. I'm not sure I could manage independently during treatment cycles." Maria's expression brightened with what appeared to be sudden inspiration. "My daughter Anna recently completed her nursing degree and is working part-time while continuing advanced certification. She's been looking for affordable housing closer to the hospital where she works 3 days weekly. Perhaps arrangement could benefit both. She could live in your home, providing support during treatment days in exchange for reduced rent." The suggestion, addressing both practical care needs and emotional isolation with elegant solution benefiting multiple parties, demonstrated problem-solving that integrated values rather than merely calculating transaction costs. Maria's approach consistently reflected the holistic perspective James and I had attempted to model throughout Gregory's upbringing. Values his garage placement and recent financial proposals suggested had never truly resonated despite our efforts. "That's worth exploring," I responded, genuine hope emerging for first time since overhearing Gregory's inheritance comments. I'd want to meet Anna first, of course, but the arrangement could potentially address multiple needs simultaneously. Maria nodded enthusiastically. "She has tomorrow afternoon free. Perhaps she could visit here to meet you. We could discuss possibilities without obligation on either side." The plan, simple yet potentially transformative, created immediate sense of agency that cancer diagnosis and subsequent dependency had significantly diminished. The possibility of returning to my own home with appropriate support, rather than remaining isolated in a garage while apparently expected to finance my own cancer care, offered both practical improvement and emotional relief from increasingly difficult circumstances. Anna's visit the following afternoon exceeded even the most optimistic expectations her mother's suggestion had created. The young woman who arrived with Maria carried herself with quiet confidence that balanced professional demeanor with genuine warmth. Her questions demonstrated both medical knowledge and human compassion, addressing practical care considerations while recognizing emotional aspects of cancer treatment that Gregory's approach had consistently overlooked. The critical days after. "Chemotherapy require consistent monitoring and symptom management," she explained, discussing potential arrangement with refreshing directness. "I work 12-hour shifts 3 days weekly, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which means I'm home the remaining days when support would be most essential following Tuesday treatments. During my work days, perhaps community resources or other arrangements could provide necessary coverage." The thoughtful consideration, addressing both capabilities and limitations honestly rather than promising unrealistic support, created immediate trust that transcended our brief acquaintance. Unlike Gregory's comprehensive promises followed by garage placement and financial calculations, Anna offered realistic assessment of potential arrangement with transparency that respected both her professional commitments and my care needs. By the end of our conversation, preliminary agreement had formed around arrangement that would benefit both parties. Anna would occupy the main bedroom of my home, providing nursing support during critical post-treatment periods in exchange for significantly reduced rent that acknowledged her professional contribution. The guest room would become my primary space during treatment, with hospital bed rental and necessary modifications to accommodate cancer care requirements. I could help coordinate these arrangements. Maria offered as discussion concluded with promising framework. The hospital bed delivery, bathroom modifications, transportation planning, these details can be managed while you focus on treatment and recovery. The offer, extending beyond professional responsibility into genuine care, exemplified exactly the values James and I had attempted to instill throughout Gregory's upbringing. Maria's consistent prioritization of human needs alongside practical considerations demonstrated integrity that contrasted sharply with Gregory's increasingly transactional approach to family obligation during serious illness. I would appreciate that tremendously, I acknowledged. Genuine gratitude for both practical assistance and consistent care that had characterized Maria's support throughout this difficult period. There's one additional matter I'd like to discuss with you privately before you leave. After Anna had departed with plans to return the following day for more detailed arrangement discussion, I reached into the bedside drawer for James's letter. The guidance that had increasingly served as compass during difficult navigation of values, disconnect between what we had taught and what Gregory now demonstrated. I'd like to share something with you, I explained, unfolding the familiar paper that had accompanied me from home to hospital to garage conversion. My late husband's final guidance regarding the resources he left for my care and well-being. Maria listened attentively as I read portions of James's letter, her expression reflecting understanding of its significance beyond specific financial directions. The central message, that resources existed primarily for my comfort and security, rather than preservation for Gregory's future benefit, resonated with increasing clarity as circumstances had revealed priorities fundamentally misaligned with values we had attempted to model and teach. James was very wise, Maria observed quietly when I finished reading. He understood what truly matters during difficult times: comfort, security, appropriate care. These are not luxuries but necessities, especially during serious illness. Her simple affirmation, validating priorities that placed well-being above inheritance preservation, provided confirmation from outside perspective that my growing resolution represented appropriate response to increasingly untenable situation. The garage placement, minimal integration into household activities, and now financial calculation of comprehensive support had demonstrated values fundamentally disconnected from what James and I had practiced and taught regarding family obligation during crisis. I've made a decision, I stated with newfound clarity despite physical weakness from recent treatment cycle. I'll be returning to my home with Anna's support arrangement rather than continuing current living situation. And I'd like to discuss another matter that requires legal consultation, but reflects values James and I always believed were fundamental to meaningful life. Maria listened with attentive respect as I outlined an emerging plan that addressed both immediate care needs and longer-term considerations about resource allocation, reflecting genuine priorities rather than obligation calculations. Her occasional nods provided silent affirmation without overstepping boundaries that her position might traditionally dictate. Balanced recognition of appropriate limitations while maintaining authentic connection that had characterized our evolving relationship. The following morning, I contacted Harrison Palmer, James's longtime attorney who had handled his estate planning, and arranged consultation regarding both immediate living transition and longer-term considerations his letter had increasingly illuminated, through contrast with Gregory's demonstrated priorities. Harrison's response combined professional efficiency with personal concern that reflected decades of connection beyond merely transactional relationship. I can visit tomorrow morning, he offered, circumventing potential transportation challenges. James would want me providing whatever assistance necessary during these difficult circumstances. Gregory's reaction to my announced decision came with predictable resistance, framed as concern rather than opposition to independence that might limit financial proposals he had recently introduced. His expression upon entering the garage space, after receiving my message requesting conversation, carried carefully controlled frustration beneath surface composure. Moving back to your house during chemotherapy creates unnecessary risks, he began, employing what appeared to be prepared talking points rather than spontaneous response. The garage space has been specifically adapted for cancer care, and our household provides continuous support that independent living cannot match, even with part-time nursing assistance. The carefully constructed argument, presenting control as concern, might have seemed reasonable without context of overheard conversation about inheritance preservation and financial calculations of support services. With that knowledge, his opposition appeared less focused on my well-being than continued management of circumstances and resources he had apparently been considering rightfully his, despite their current designation for my care and security. "I appreciate everything you've provided," I responded with genuine acknowledgement of practical arrangements despite their emotional limitations. "But returning home with appropriate support better addresses both physical and emotional aspects of cancer recovery. The garage environment has actually been contributing to respiratory difficulties that complicate treatment effects." Gregory's expression flickered briefly with something resembling guilt before resuming controlled composure that characterized his approach to difficult conversations. "If the garage space presents concerns, we could certainly explore alternatives within the house. Perhaps Thomas could temporarily relocate upstairs to create main-floor accommodation with better environmental controls." The sudden flexibility, offering household integration previously deemed impossible, suggested recognition that independent arrangements might impact financial proposals he had recently introduced. The shift from containment strategy to inclusion offer appeared motivated by potential loss of control rather than genuine reconsideration of appropriate cancer support arrangements. "I've already made arrangements," I explained with gentle firmness that acknowledged his position while maintaining newly established boundaries. Anna's nursing background provides professional support during critical treatment periods, and returning to familiar surroundings offers emotional benefits that complement medical considerations. Harrison is handling necessary legal documentation and coordination with medical providers regarding treatment continuation. The reference to James's attorney created visible tension in Gregory's expression, suggesting awareness that legal consultation might extend beyond simple living arrangements into broader considerations about resource allocation and estate planning. His response combined attempted persuasion with subtle implication that independent decision-making might indicate compromised judgment rather than legitimate self-determination. "These decisions seem unusually sudden," he observed with carefully modulated concern. "Treatment side effects can impact cognitive function and decision-making capacity. Perhaps we should consult Dr. Patel before implementing significant changes." During active chemotherapy protocols. The implicit suggestion that asserting independence reflected impaired judgment rather than legitimate self-determination demonstrated troubling willingness to pathologize decisions that limited his control over circumstances and resources. The approach revealed disturbing capacity for reframing exploitation as protection, financial self-interest as familial concern. "Harrison has already consulted with Dr. Patel," I responded, anticipating this direction based on increasing pattern. Recognition regarding Gregory's strategic approaches to maintaining control. Medical opinion supports returning home with appropriate nursing support as potentially beneficial for both physical and emotional aspects of cancer recovery. Gregory's expression tightened with recognition that prepared counters had been effectively addressed through advanced consultation with relevant authorities. His response shifted from concern framing to more direct acknowledgement of financial implications previously presented as secondary considerations. "We should discuss resource allocation before finalizing these arrangements," he suggested, reverting to financial focus that appeared increasingly central to his approach. "The cost of private nursing support, even part-time, significantly exceeds current expenses under existing arrangements. Prudent financial management requires comprehensive assessment before committing to potentially unsustainable care models." The transparent pivot, placing financial considerations ahead of well-being concerns, confirmed priorities fundamentally misaligned with values James and I had attempted to instill throughout his upbringing. Gregory's approach had evolved from subtle containment strategies to explicit calculation that transformed family support during illness into balance sheet consideration with unsettling detachment. "James left very clear guidance regarding resource allocation," I responded, referencing without directly quoting the letter that had increasingly served as moral compass during difficult navigation of values disconnection. The primary purpose of the estate is providing for my comfort, security, and appropriate care during whatever challenges might emerge after his passing. All other considerations remain secondary to that fundamental priority. The gentle but firm restatement, establishing clear hierarchy of legitimate resource claims, created momentary silence as Gregory processed implications regarding inheritance, expectations that had apparently influenced his approach to my cancer care. His expression reflected internal calculation rather than emotional response, assessing strategic options rather than reconnecting with values once presumed shared across generations. "Of course your care remains priority," he acknowledged finally. Language precisely chosen to maintain appearance of appropriate concern while preserving potential future claims against resources he had increasingly treated as delayed inheritance. "I simply want to ensure sustainable planning that addresses both immediate needs and longer-term considerations." The careful phrasing, neither conceding fundamental priorities nor directly challenging their legitimacy, reflected strategic positioning rather than values realignment. Gregory's approach to difficult conversation demonstrated the same calculated efficiency that had characterized his cancer support, addressing surface requirements while maintaining emotional distance and preserving future options regardless of current circumstances. The following week brought swift implementation of arrangements Harrison had coordinated with remarkable efficiency that reflected both professional excellence and personal commitment to honoring James's intentions regarding my care. Anna moved into the main bedroom of my home while the guest room was transformed with hospital bed rental and necessary modifications to support cancer treatment requirements. Maria's assistance proved invaluable during transition, coordinating household preparations while managing logistical details that might otherwise have created overwhelming complexity during period of physical compromise from ongoing chemotherapy. Her attention extended beyond practical arrangements to emotional considerations that Gregory's approach had consistently overlooked, arranging familiar photographs beside the hospital bed, ensuring treasured books remained within easy reach, creating environment that nourished spirit alongside addressing medical necessities. Gregory's response to implemented changes combined surface cooperation with careful distance that suggested tactical retreat rather than genuine acceptance. He assisted with necessary transportation arrangements during transition, while maintaining emotional reserve that preserved future positioning options regardless of immediate circumstances. His visits following relocation occurred with predictable scheduling that reflected obligation management rather than genuine connection, maintaining appearance of appropriate attention while limiting actual engagement. The contrast between previous garage isolation and current home-based support created immediate improvement in both physical symptoms and emotional well-being, despite ongoing chemotherapy challenges. Anna's professional knowledge combined with genuine compassion provided balanced care that addressed medical requirements while recognizing human needs beyond patient status. The respiratory difficulties that had increasingly complicated treatment effects in the garage environment gradually improved within properly maintained residential space, confirming Maria's assessment about potential health impacts of converted workshop accommodation. Following Harrison's careful consultation and thorough review of James's explicit intentions regarding estate planning, I finalized arrangements that reflected values consistently practiced throughout our marriage, rather than obligations constructed through Gregory's increasingly transactional framework. The decision, establishing trust that prioritized my ongoing care while designating Maria as ultimate beneficiary following my eventual passing, represented neither impulsive reaction nor punitive response, but thoughtful alignment with demonstrated priorities and genuine connection. James was very specific about resources existing primarily for your comfort and security, Harrison affirmed during final review of legal documentation. The arrangements we've established honor his intentions while recognizing relationships that reflect the values you shared throughout your marriage. The quiet affirmation, validating decisions based on demonstrated care rather than biological obligation, provided reassurance that adjustments reflected appropriate response to circumstances rather than emotional reaction to disappointment. The trust provisions ensured continuing security regardless of cancer outcome, while acknowledging through ultimate distribution the genuine support Maria had consistently provided without calculation or contingency during most vulnerable period. When Gregory eventually learned about revised estate planning through Harrison's professional notification as legally required, his response reflected the same controlled calculation that had characterized his approach to my cancer care. His carefully constructed message combined disappointment, framing with strategic positioning that preserved potential future claims through suggested cognitive impairment rather than legitimate self-determination. I'm concerned these significant changes during active chemotherapy may reflect treatment effects on decision-making capacity, he stated during carefully scheduled visit following notification. Perhaps we should consult specialists regarding cognitive assessment before implementing arrangements that dramatically impact established family expectations. The transparent attempt, substituting medical pathologizing for genuine engagement, with demonstrated priorities, confirmed wisdom of completed arrangements rather than suggesting reconsideration. Gregory's response focused entirely on inheritance implications rather than examining what his approach to cancer care revealed about fundamental values, disconnection between what James and I had modeled and what he currently demonstrated through controlled calculation rather than genuine support. The arrangements reflect carefully considered priorities based on demonstrated values rather than presumed obligations, I explained with gentle firmness that acknowledged his position while maintaining established boundaries. Harrison consulted appropriate medical and psychological professionals before finalizing documentation precisely to address potential concerns about capacity during treatment. The conversation that followed revealed fundamental disconnection that extended beyond specific inheritance expectations into divergent understanding of what family truly means during critical circumstances. Gregory's framework, centered on transaction calculation and obligation management rather than genuine connection, had transformed what should have been meaningful support during serious illness into strategic positioning for resource access, regardless of demonstrated priorities. 6 months later, as final chemotherapy cycle concluded with promising indicators regarding treatment efficacy, the contrast between current support, arrangements, and previous garage isolation created profound clarity about necessary boundaries moving forward. Anna's professional knowledge combined with genuine compassion had provided balanced care that addressed medical requirements while recognizing human needs beyond patient status. Maria's consistent presence offered connection that acknowledged both illness challenges and continuing personhood, despite cancer's temporary centrality in daily experience. The completion of chemotherapy protocols brought cautious optimism from medical team regarding prognosis, though ongoing monitoring would remain necessary for years following treatment conclusion. The physical recovery, gradual restoration of energy and reduction of symptom burden following protocol completion, paralleled emotional recalibration regarding family relationships and demonstrated priorities, rather than presumed obligations based on biological connection alone. Gregory maintained carefully scheduled visits following notification of estate revision. His approach combining surface attention with Gregory maintained carefully scheduled visits following notification of estate revision. His approach combining surface attention with strategic positioning that preserved potential future claims through suggested temporary nature of arrangements rather than permanent realignment. Once you've fully recovered from treatment effects, we should revisit these decisions, he suggested during post-chemotherapy visit that maintained the same emotional distance characterizing his approach throughout illness. Medical stress often creates temporary perspective shifts that require reevaluation when health stabilizes. The transparent strategy, framing legitimate reprioritization as temporary reaction requiring eventual reversal, confirmed wisdom of established arrangements. Rather than suggesting reconsideration, Gregory's consistent focus on inheritance implications, rather than examining what his approach to cancer care revealed about fundamental values, demonstrated precisely why the revised estate planning reflected appropriate response to demonstrated priorities rather than presumed obligations. The arrangements reflect values consistently practiced throughout my life, I explained with gentle firmness that acknowledged his position while maintaining established boundaries. They honor genuine connection demonstrated through meaningful support, rather than calculated obligation managed alongside competing priorities. This fundamental clarity, distinguishing between relationship demonstrated through consistent presence versus obligation, fulfilled through efficient management, guided interactions moving forward with both Gregory and Maria. Where he maintained scheduled visits characterized by appropriate inquiries without emotional engagement, she provided consistent connection that acknowledged both recovery challenges and continuing personhood beyond patient status cancer had temporarily imposed. 1 year after diagnosis, with chemotherapy completed and recovery progressing steadily, if slowly, Dr. Patel delivered guardedly optimistic assessment regarding prognosis. The scans show no evidence of disease at this time, he explained during follow-up consultation, where Anna accompanied me pursuant to our continuing arrangement. While we can't use terms like cured given the nature of ovarian cancer, these results represent best possible outcome following treatment protocols. The qualified positive news, acknowledging both current absence of detectable disease and continuing need for vigilance, created space for gradual resumption of activities, beyond immediate recovery requirements. As physical strength returned through careful rehabilitation and nutrition support, Anna helped coordinate. Emotional resilience similarly increased through meaningful connection. Maria consistently provided alongside practical assistance that transcended employment parameters into genuine friendship. During this recovery period, Gregory maintained his pattern of scheduled visits and appropriate inquiries without emotional engagement, his approach suggesting obligation management rather than genuine connection despite significant improvement in health status. Our interactions remained cordial but distant, the fundamental values disconnection revealed through his approach to cancer care, creating boundaries that acknowledged reality rather than maintaining illusions about shared priorities. Maria's role continued evolving beyond initial employment relationship into genuine partnership, characterized by mutual respect and shared values that transcended conventional categories. Her consistent presence, reliable, compassionate, attentive to both practical needs and emotional well-being, demonstrated exactly the priorities James and I had attempted to instill throughout Gregory's upbringing. Values his garage placement and financial calculations had revealed never truly resonated despite our efforts. 18 months after diagnosis, with recovery sufficiently advanced to permit cautious travel consideration, I invited Maria to accompany me on modest journey to coastal bed and breakfast James and I had frequently enjoyed during our marriage. The invitation, acknowledging her importance beyond employment parameters, reflected growing recognition of relationship that defied conventional categorization while providing genuine connection increasingly central to meaningful life following serious illness. I couldn't possibly accept, Maria responded initially, characteristic humility creating hesitation despite our evolved relationship. That special place belongs to memories with Mr. James. I wouldn't want to intrude on such important connection. James always believed experiences should be shared with those who bring meaning to our lives, I explained, genuine certainty about his perspective based on values consistently demonstrated throughout our marriage. He would approve completely of your companionship during this first post-recovery journey. The coastal visit created space for conversations that acknowledged relationship evolution beyond initial parameters into something resembling chosen family, connection based on demonstrated values and consistent presence rather than biological obligation, or employment transaction. Against backdrop of ocean waves James and I had so often enjoyed together, Maria and I discussed experiences that had revealed fundamental truths about what matters most when serious illness strips away pretense and performance to expose genuine priorities. I never expected such different responses. I acknowledged during Sunset Beach Walk that sustainable energy had only recently permitted. James and I believed we had demonstrated consistent values about family supporting family during difficult times. Gregory's approach, the garage placement, minimal integration, financial calculations, revealed priorities fundamentally different from everything we thought we had taught through both instruction and example. Maria nodded, understanding without judgment that reflected her consistently balanced perspective. Children sometimes develop values different from parents despite careful teaching. Some lessons must be lived to be truly learned, and Gregory perhaps never experienced vulnerability that might have developed compassion beyond efficiency. This generous interpretation, suggesting lack of formative experience rather than fundamental character deficiency, offered perspective that balanced disappointment with understanding without surrendering appropriate boundaries established through demonstrated priorities. Maria's approach consistently integrated accountability with compassion, acknowledging reality while recognizing complexity beyond simple categorization. Your relationship with Anna demonstrates different pattern, I observed, noting how Maria's daughter had evolved from contracted care provider to genuine household member, whose presence created meaningful connection beyond practical support. She clearly absorbed the values you demonstrated throughout her upbringing about genuine presence during difficulty, rather than merely efficient management of obligations. Maria smiled with modest pride that acknowledged parental influence without claiming complete credit for daughter's admirable qualities. Anna witnessed sacrifice integrated with joy, rather than presented as burden. When I worked multiple jobs to support our family, I shared stories about possibilities my efforts created, rather than responsibilities they fulfilled. Perhaps that perspective difference matters in how children interpret family obligation. This insightful distinction between obligation presented as burden versus opportunity for meaningful connection highlighted exactly what had been missing from Gregory's approach to cancer support, where he had calculated costs and managed disruption, focusing on efficient containment rather than genuine integration. Maria had consistently demonstrated values that transformed assistance into connection, practical support into meaningful presence. As recovery continued strengthening body and spirit through carefully managed rehabilitation and meaningful engagement, the relationship with Maria evolved beyond conventional categories into something resembling chosen family, connection based on demonstrated values and consistent presence rather than biological obligation or employment transaction. Our interactions balanced appropriate boundaries with genuine affection, creating partnership that honored respective life experiences while building shared narrative through current connection. 2 years after diagnosis, with cautious optimism regarding continued absence of detectable disease, I formalized arrangements Harrison had helped establish during active treatment period. The trust provisions, ensuring continuing security regardless of potential cancer recurrence, while acknowledging through ultimate distribution the genuine support Maria had consistently provided, reflected values James and I had shared throughout our marriage rather than conventional expectations about biological inheritance, regardless of demonstrated priorities. These arrangements honor what matters most, Harrison affirmed during final documentation review. James was very specific about resources existing primarily for your comfort and security, with secondary consideration for rewarding relationships that demonstrated genuine care rather than calculated obligation. Gregory's response to formalized arrangements maintained the same controlled calculation that had characterized his approach throughout cancer treatment and recovery. His carefully worded message combined disappointment framing with implied temporary nature of decisions he apparently still considered reversible, despite multiple conversations clarifying their permanence and legitimacy. I respect your current wishes while maintaining hope that perspective might eventually shift toward traditional family considerations, he stated during conversation following final documentation notification. Perhaps continued recovery will create space for reconsidering arrangements that dramatically impact established expectations. The transparent strategy, suggesting legitimate reprioritization, reflected temporary reaction requiring eventual reversal rather than permanent realignment based on demonstrated values, confirmed wisdom of established arrangements rather than suggesting reconsideration. Gregory's consistent focus on inheritance implications, rather than examining what his approach to cancer care revealed about fundamental values, connection demonstrated precisely why the revised estate planning reflected appropriate response to demonstrated priorities. Maria's reaction to formalized arrangements reflected characteristic humility that had consistently defined her approach despite our evolved relationship. This generosity exceeds anything I could have anticipated or feel deserving of, she acknowledged when informed about trust provisions following final documentation. My support came from genuine care rather than expectation of reward. Precisely why the arrangements honor what matters most, I explained. Genuine certainty about alignment with values James and I had shared throughout our marriage. They recognize relationship demonstrated through consistent presence during difficulty, rather than calculated obligation managed alongside competing priorities. 3 years after diagnosis, with medical stability cautiously established through regular monitoring and continued absence of detectable disease, life had assumed new patterns that balanced health maintenance with meaningful engagement. Anna had completed advanced nursing certification while continuing reduced rent residence that evolved from care arrangement into genuine household partnership. Maria maintained consistent presence that transcended conventional categories into relationship resembling chosen family based on demonstrated values rather than biological obligation. Gregory continued scheduled visits characterized by appropriate inquiries without emotional engagement, his approach suggesting obligation management rather than genuine connection despite significant improvement in health status. Our interactions remained cordial but appropriately distant. The fundamental values disconnection revealed through his approach to cancer care, establishing boundaries that acknowledged reality rather than maintaining illusions about shared priorities. During particularly meaningful afternoon tea with Maria on my 76th birthday, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey serious illness had prompted. Not merely physical challenges overcome through medical intervention, but profound clarity about what constitutes genuine connection versus calculated obligation. The cancer diagnosis that initially seemed life's most devastating challenge had ultimately revealed essential truths about values demonstrated through consistent presence rather than merely proclaimed through convenient declaration. When I received the diagnosis 3 years ago, I couldn't have imagined anything positive emerging from such frightening circumstance, I acknowledged as we enjoyed the garden James had planted and Maria had faithfully maintained throughout illness and recovery. Yet the clarity it created about genuine connection versus calculated obligation provided insight that might otherwise have remained obscured beneath comfortable assumptions and polite performance. Maria nodded, understanding without requiring. Elaborate explanation after shared journey that had created profound connection, transcending conventional categories. Difficult circumstances reveal true priorities more clearly than comfortable situations that permit maintaining appearances without demonstrating actual values. Sometimes painful truth creates space for meaningful authenticity impossible through continued pretense. This wisdom, acknowledging how crisis reveals genuine priorities beneath surface performance, captured exactly what cancer journey had ultimately provided, beyond medical challenges overcome through treatment protocols. The diagnosis that initially seemed life's most devastating challenge had revealed essential truths about values demonstrated through consistent presence, rather than merely proclaimed through convenient declaration. The son who relegated his mother, to garage quarters following cancer diagnosis had revealed priorities fundamentally disconnected from values presumably instilled throughout upbringing. The housekeeper who consistently provided genuine connection alongside practical support had demonstrated authentic care, transcending employment parameters into chosen family based on shared values rather than biological obligation. As afternoon. Sunlight filtered through garden trees James had planted decades earlier, creating dappled patterns across the table where Maria and I shared birthday tea. I experienced profound gratitude for clarity serious illness had ultimately provided alongside medical challenges overcome through treatment protocols. The cancer diagnosis that initially seemed life's cruelest blow had revealed essential truths about connection versus obligation, presence versus performance, values demonstrated versus merely proclaimed. Life often provides wisdom through unexpected channels, I observed, watching butterfly navigate blooming flowers with delicate precision that suggested purpose beyond apparent randomness. Perhaps meaning emerges not from avoiding difficulty, but from discovering authentic connection through challenges that reveal genuine priorities beneath comfortable pretense. Maria smiled with quiet understanding that required no elaborate explanation after shared journey had created profound connection, transcending conventional categories. The most valuable inheritance isn't what's written in legal documents, but what's demonstrated through consistent presence when presence matters most. This simple truth, acknowledging value demonstrated through action rather than claimed through entitlement, captured exactly what Cancer Journey had ultimately revealed, about family defined by chosen connection rather than merely biological obligation. The illness that initially seemed devastating interruption had created unexpected clarity about what constitutes genuine relationship versus calculated transaction disguised as familial responsibility. The garage that once symbolized isolation had ultimately revealed essential truths that enabled authentic connection based on demonstrated values rather than presumed obligation. The cancer diagnosis that seemed life's cruelest challenge had provided unexpected gift of clarity about what matters most when surface appearances dissolve to reveal genuine priorities beneath comfortable performance. As Butterfly completed its garden journey before disappearing beyond fence into wider world, I silently thanked James for wisdom that had guided difficult navigation through unexpected terrain his absence had required traversing alone. His final guidance, prioritizing my comfort and security above inheritance preservation, had provided foundation for discovering authentic connection, transcending conventional categories into something resembling chosen family based on demonstrated values rather than biological obligation.